Hello. The start time of this is midday. The current time is 11:54. So if you're watching afterwards, you'll probably skip the next 5, 6 minutes, and then I'll be back with you. Cheers. Bye. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's webinar on the business impact of coronavirus for our clients. Thanks for tuning in, and looking forward to taking you through some of the major changes in the last week. Fortunately, there haven't been too many of them, which means we can focus on how the schemes that were introduced in the past are being enacted by the government. So the agenda for today, let me bring that up. Let's bring up that agenda. Oh, technology. The agenda for today is to look at furloughing employees, a little bit more information on that, how it's going to work, specifically holiday, maternity rights, and a little bit more on directors. Then we're going to talk about grants, the small business grants, whether grants are taxable income, and then a little bit on compliance checks as well. Before moving swiftly on to the question and answer session. I'm going to try and hit you as quickly as I can with the information I want to give so that we've got more space for your questions. Okay, let's start with holiday then. Oh, before we start, I need to just let you know before we start that this is general guidance rather than specific information that relates to you as an individual. If you're after specific information that relates to you and your business, come to us direct and we would be happy to provide you with advice. This is guidance so that you know what's going on in the world out there, and it shouldn't be relied upon as specific guidance for your business. Also, if you do use your name, remember that this is a publicly viewable webinar, and therefore your name and the question you ask will be associated with each other in the public domain. So please only use your name if you're happy for that to happen. Okay. My first slide is about business impact. Just a quick word on business impact. Thankfully, it seems across a lot of our clients that trade hasn't been impacted too badly unless the trade involves going out to somewhere in order to, or making something. But there's a lot of businesses that have found a way to continue to trade. Certainly not the case for everybody, but I'm surprised at the proportion that are still able to work. And in terms of productivity, where workers are working from home, I've noticed and I've been hearing that productivity is starting to drop as the impact of this is kind of wearing on employees. So I think that taking the effort as an employer to look after your team in the way that you would if they were working in your office will be especially important in the coming weeks. There's a lot that you can do from home, but there's just sort of a spark that you get from an office that can easily be lost when you're not there. And finally, cash flow. I think people are starting to realise that it's real, but that although money stopped flowing a couple of weeks ago, it is starting to flow again. I think that the grants coming will, well, news that the grants are coming will have helped, and I think that when the grants do start flowing, that will help even more. So that's just an overview of the business impact as we've seen it. And now we'll move on to holiday. So this section is on furlough, and I'd like to start with holiday and how that is being impacted. The government have not yet told us that holiday will stop accruing during furlough, and so for that reason we assume that it will continue to accrue. So if you furlough somebody for 3 months, they still earn a quarter of their year's entitlement to holidays and any bank holidays during that period as well. So over the year, that's 28 days minimum that we must pay our employees for holiday. Because people are furloughed, the government have then said that they can have an extra 2 years in order to take that holiday. Holiday is granted at an employer's discretion, not the employee's discretion. And so if they are unable to take holiday because of the coronavirus, then it can be pushed out for up to 2 years. If somebody leaves before the end of that 2-year period and they have not yet used all of their holiday, they must be paid that money in lieu of the holiday that they have missed. Bank holidays are not included in the 4 weeks. It's 4 weeks plus bank holiday as the holiday allowance in the UK, in England and Wales. But bank holidays can be included within the amount that is pushed out over the next 2 years. This doesn't change the employment contract, it adds to the employment contract. So if your contract already has rules about carrying forward holiday, those are still in effect as well. Confused? It is a little bit confusing, but if, as with all of this section on holidays and furlough, the accounting advice on the grant, the issue of the grant should be taken alongside the employment law that you may seek as well as to how you deal with your employees. Okay. Next up, what can employees and employers do about holiday? Employees can continue to request holiday. If an employee wants to take holiday, they can request it. If they've been furloughed, I guess that's pretty tricky, and the employer is able to say no. If an employee no longer wants to take holiday that they've previously booked, because the idea of staying at home with their significant other instead of going to some sunny beach together is not attractive, then they can request that the holiday is cancelled and carried forward. Their employer is entitled to say no, you've booked it and you have to take it. I think on a case-by-case basis, employers will be making a decision about what they want to do there. And then what can employers do? Employers can require staff to take holiday, and they can require staff to cancel holiday. My understanding is that notice that you give for requiring someone to take holiday is as long as the holiday itself, unless your contract says otherwise. And if an employee wants to, so if an employer wants a holiday to be cancelled, this can be done by giving at least the same number of days. I thought it was at least double the number of days. Oh, you can require an employee to take holiday if you give at least twice as many days as you are asking them to take, and you can cancel their holiday on at least the same notice as the number of holidays that they have requested to take. If you're going to start messing with holiday, though, then take it seriously. Maybe use a resource such as ACAS to get some employment guidance, or an employment lawyer or HR specialist for employment law advice. So what about the business impact of doing this? Yeah, we've got the employment side and the employment law side. We don't want people falling foul of that. But let's also bear in mind the impact on the individual if you start cancelling or requiring them to take holiday. But also the impact if you don't, because if you don't and this lasts for a while, what are people going to do when we get to the end of furlough? Are they going to want to take a whole load of holiday? Is everyone going to want to do that at the same time? How are we going to manage the process of allowing people time off without businesses falling over because everyone wants to go away somewhere sunny at the same time? Will people want to go away when this is over? I've certainly spoken to a few people who've said, we've cancelled our holiday and we're not interested in going right now. We want to stay home, we want to stay safe. Maybe encouraging people to take the time off that they need in order to recover will be tricky. And I think whilst people are working from home with family at home as well, with the stresses of childcare and the stresses of the limited movement and things like that, we may find as employers that we need to encourage people to take time off, whereas usually they'd be very eager to take it. It's something that the employer will need to look out for, I think. How do employees use their holiday? Maternity is next. This is a really complex area, and so if a client asks me specifically about maternity leave, I will often direct them straight to an employment lawyer or HR specialist, because as an employer you don't want to get, well, you don't want to get any kind of discrimination wrong. Now hang on, you don't want to discriminate against anybody, and therefore it's worth taking employment advice to make sure that you are not. But the law does protect pregnant mothers and new mothers, and hopefully fathers in the same way, very well. So it's worth being very sure about what you're doing and sure that it's what you intended to do, but also sure that it is legal. So seek advice if you need it. SMP is still payable. Statutory maternity pay is still payable, and can be recovered from the government. So if you have somebody on maternity, they can continue to be paid as they were before, and you can continue to recover almost all of that money, depending on the size of your business, from the government. Whether it's slightly more or slightly less than what you pay the mother is determined by how big your business is, but broadly you can recover all of your SMP. So you've got this mother at home who is receiving statutory maternity pay. They're out the first few weeks and they're receiving the 150 odd quid and thinking, well, this isn't fair because my colleagues who were working but now cannot work are receiving 80% of their pay and they don't even have a child at home to look after. That's the way this works. If you're on maternity leave, you are entitled to up to a year off and you receive pay in the way that it has always been set out. If you wish to receive the 80% instead, as the parent, you can go to your employer and say, hey, if I gave you notice that I would like to end my maternity leave early, would you put me on furlough? The employer may say yes. If they do, then that could happen. The employee gives notice, comes back, goes on furlough. That money would be covered and you would be able to receive the furlough money back. Again, following the rules that we've discussed before about them needing to have been an employee before 20th of February, but that wouldn't be an issue if they're a mother because they wouldn't be receiving SMP unless they've been with you for longer than a month. But once they've done that, they cannot go back on maternity leave. So if they choose to come back and go on furlough, they cannot then go back to SMP and take up that right to have a year off. There may be options under shared parental leave where one parent takes time off and then the other, or both take it off together. So there may be options there for one to come back and the other to use their leave later in the year. But that is super complex. And so if you have an employee who's considering it, then they should seek advice, or you should seek advice together to ensure that what you're doing works for both and also is compliant with the law. Really complex area, but that's maternity in a nutshell. Final thing I'd say on it is that if you do pay per contract at full pay for a certain period of time that's longer or more than the statutory maternity pay, then the pay that is in addition to statutory maternity pay would be covered by the furlough scheme. That's it on furlough. If you've got any questions, fire them to us. We've got Kate pushing the slides through, and we've got Diana in the background as well. Diana is, oh, hello, she's just asked a question. We'll cover the questions at the end, but please do ask them because it gives Diana a chance to get some answers to us by the end of the session. Let's move on then to company directors. So I'm going to tell you a little bit, and it's going to use some guidance, and this guidance is from HMRC, and it covers the Coronavirus Job Retention Scheme, the last updated on the 4th of April. And the Companies Act 2006. If we skip ahead, I'm going to start with the Companies Act, and we're just going to look at, just remind you of, directors, your duties under the Companies Act. Kate, if you just skip ahead to the next slide, please, where it says Companies Act 2006 general duties, or my face, that works too. Directors, I shall tell you your duties whilst the next slide comes up. You have the duty to act within the powers allowed to you by the company's Articles of Association. You have the duty to promote the success of the company, the duty to exercise independent judgment. You have the duty to exercise reasonable care, skill, and diligence, the duty to avoid conflicts of interest, the duty to not accept benefits from third parties, and the duty to declare interest in proposed transactions or arrangements. If you'd like a little bit more on any of those, that is available on the government website if you search for the Companies Act. There's one I'm going to drill down into specifically, which is the duty to promote the success of the company. I'd like you to understand that before we look at the furlough rules. So on the next slide, it goes into a little bit more detail about that. So the duty to promote the success of the company. Kate, if you just skip ahead again, please. because I didn't remember this. I didn't learn it off by heart. A director of a company must act in the way he considers, sexist, in good faith, would be most likely to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its members as a whole, and in doing so have regard, amongst other matters, to the likely consequences of any decision in the long term, the interests of the company's employees, the need to foster the company's business relationships with suppliers, customers, and others, the impact of the company's operations on the community and the environment, the desirability of the company maintaining the reputation for high standards of business conduct, and the need to act fairly as between members of the company. These are the duties these are all part of the duty of the director to promote the success of the company. There's an additional one that's not on the slide that I want to tell you about, which is that the duty imposed by this section has effect subject to any enactment or rule of law requiring directors to consider or act in the interest of creditors. So you've got to do everything on this slide, but you also have to consider the act of the interest of the creditors along the way. So a whole load of words here, but basically saying that you've got to look after the interests of the business as a director. So now let's have a little look at what the job retention scheme says for directors. Directors are eligible for furlough and support. Where a company considers that it is in compliance with the statutory duties of one or more of the individual salaried directors, the board can decide that such directors should be furloughed. So this is saying, so long as they can be furloughed and the company can still be responsible for its duties, then they can be furloughed. They should not do work of they should not do work of a kind they would carry out in normal circumstance to generate commercial revenue and provide services to or on behalf of the company. So this is saying that you must be furloughed. Oh, excuse me, there's a little part that's missing out from the slide, which is important. Where furloughed directors need to carry out particular duties to fulfill statutory obligations, they may do so, provided they do no more than would be reasonably judged necessary for that purpose. For instance, they should do no work. They should not do work of a kind they would carry out in normal circumstance to generate commercial revenue or provide services to or on behalf of the company. What this is basically saying is that if a company director is legally required to do something, then he must go on to do it, whether he is furloughed or not. But this should not include generating revenue or providing services to your customers. This means that if you have more than one director, it may be quite straightforward to furlough one of them. You furlough one of the directors and the other directors are able to look after the company for them. So if you can do that, then great, go ahead and furlough one of your directors. For example, if you have a sales director and your business isn't selling at the moment, maybe you would choose to furlough the sales director for a short period of time. Maybe you furlough directors in rotation, so there is always somebody responsible, depending on what's going on within your business. But what if you have one director? I think it depends whether you intend to completely put your business on ice, or whether you intend to keep things ticking over so that you're ready to rebound after this. If you are keeping your business ticking over in order to rebound after this, then I would argue that that is fulfilling the statutory duties of the director, and therefore maybe that director cannot be furloughed and the money cannot be recovered. So if you are furloughing and completely icing the company, or putting the company on ice until we get through the furlough period, you're not responding to emails to promote the services of the business or to make money in the future, then yeah, I would say you can be furloughed and you can get the money back. But if you are going to continue to undertake activities that prepare the business for the future, I think it's questionable about whether you should be furloughing yourself and reclaiming the money. This is all the guidance we've been given so far. I hope it helps some people work out what they want to do with regard to furlough. If you've got any specific questions, fire them across to us, or maybe afterwards. If you'd prefer a private conversation, drop us an email. Okay, let's see what the next slide is, Kate. Oh, I said it. I knew it was in there somewhere. So let's move on to this. Let's consider the business impact of furlough then. Can the business continue to fulfill its duties if it's furloughed its employees? I think that's a really interesting question. If you furlough your employees, what happens to the business that's left behind? Who's going to be keeping those relationships strong? Now, if your customers are forgiving or if they're closing as well, then maybe the impact on the supply chain of you furloughing yourself will be minimal, in which case, yeah, that makes sense. Furlough as many people as you can in order to stop your business from making losses. Certainly, to continue to fulfill your duties as a director, you need to be trying to avoid losses and promote the business in the best way you can. But what about service quality and reputation from staying open? I mean, if you stay open, but you're unable to provide a service in the way you usually would, for example, if you can't get the normal materials and you need to use substitutes that are not quite as good, is this going to damage your reputation? Does this mean that you may find yourself in a market where people have furloughed themselves and you are the only competitor? So it's a monopoly you now find yourself having over this market. But if you can't deliver a good service, are you going to come out of this period and find that you've now turned the whole market off of your service because the quality wasn't there? What about the reputation from staying open? Maybe it will help you if you stay open. Will people feel, does it give a good image for the business? Equally, does it give a good image for the business if you close? Would your customers expect you to be able to weather this without closing completely, keeping a skeleton staff on? I think that the impact on the wider business environment of you choosing to stay open or close should be considered, because long term it can impact your profits. Okay, grants. How do I apply? If you are in Taunton, Somerset Western Taunton, you may have already applied for your grant. You may have been told that you have been successful in your application and that the money is already on its way to you. You may be one of the lucky few who have received an email already and also received the money. I've heard of people receiving the money, having received the email only yesterday. Not many cases of that, but they're out there. As for the other grants, people are asking, when can I apply for them? You can apply for the job retention, the furlough scheme grant, hopefully by the end of April, once HMRC have built the web portal for this. And you can apply for the self-employed grant. This is where you get an average of your profits over the last 3 years, prorated down to 3 months, and you get that grant early in June. That web portal, we haven't even heard about them building that yet, so I guess it won't be until May that that's available. But that is just a guess at this point, we don't know. The first grant you apply for through your local council, and the other 2 grants you will apply for through HMRC online, but it will not be part of the normal process. So if you were to do anything now to prepare yourself for either of these, it would be to ask the question, do I have an HMRC online account? Am I able to access PAYE for the job retention scheme, or my self-employment or my self-assessment account for the self-employed grant? If you do not, now is the time to take action, because it can take up to 10 days for HMRC to write to you with a code that activates the online service. I wouldn't want to get to the end of April and then realise I had another fortnight to wait before I could get onto the HMRC online system in order to even apply for the money. That could take us to the end of May before people start getting money that covers the period from 1st of March. So let's get ahead of this. If you want support with applying for any of these grants, or with getting yourself signed up with HMRC, we will be offering that support, and most of those services will be offered by Diana or by Wendy on our team. So if you get in touch with me or Diana or Wendy, we can discuss with you what you need from us, and what we would do to help you. But yeah, absolutely, we can support you with getting these done. Our intention is to write an email to everyone who is a payroll, ensuring that they have an HMRC online account, and also to everyone who is self-employed. But these emails we are prioritizing, so we'll do payroll first, self-employed probably towards the end of the month. So look out for it, but if you want to get a jump on everyone else, get on there yourself and see if you're registered. I think it makes perfect sense to just make sure you've got an HMRC online account ready to go. All right. Here we go. Here's an interesting one. This shocked a couple on my team. Are grants taxable? Yes, absolutely, they are taxable. And you have to pay income tax on grant money that you receive in this case. They are, however, outside the scope of VAT, so you do not need to charge or reduce the amount you receive for VAT, and they do not impact your VAT registration and deregistration thresholds. So if you're just hovering under and you receive 10 grand, you wouldn't automatically have to register for VAT. I've done a couple of examples to help explain why these are taxable, because that's not fair, surely, that you're being taxed. So you're not actually receiving 10 grand, but you're receiving 8 grand. It's all a big lie. Well, not necessarily. If you spend £10,000 on promoting your business, marketing materials, or paying for staff, or just covering the rent, if you put that money to good use within the business, which is a tax deductible use, then you have received an income of 10 grand, but you've also had a deduction of 10 grand because those costs are allowable and taxable as well. So you've got 10,000 income balanced against 10,000 of costs. So it's tax neutral and you end up not paying tax on the grant. So think of this as a replacement to help you get to break even. And if you get to break even, there'll be no tax, a replacement of income to help you get to break even. If you do that, then there'll be no tax to pay. However, if you take the money out as a profit, if you don't spend it all on the business and you withdraw it, there would be tax to pay, as there would be with any income that you withdraw from your business, subject to having losses brought forward or anything that we normally talk to you about as being a reason why you don't pay tax. I've got another example just to try and explain it in a different way, because I didn't know whether numbers or words would be most useful. So let's look at the numbers. I've got an example A on the next slide. And here we go. So company A has an income of 500, costs of 400,000, and they will make a profit of 100,000. They're then going to receive 10,000 in grant money. So the taxable profit is 110,000, which is higher than if they hadn't received the grant. But if they spend all that money, if you look to example 2, in example 2, this chap is receiving 80,000 in income, but is spending more than that in his costs. So he's making a 15 grand loss. He then receives 10,000 from the government to support him through this loss-making period, and the resulting position is a £5,000 loss. Well, that's not taxable because he hasn't made a profit. He's not taxed. He's only taxed on income that he makes after costs. Note in this case, his revenue was 80,000, which is below the VAT threshold. He receives another 10,000 in grant income. The VAT registration threshold sits in between, but he has not breached it because grant income is not taxable. Okay, I hope that makes some sense. Who should watch out? Watch out if you plan to take the money, the grant money, to spend yourself around the home or for your living costs, i.e. non-business expenses. They would always fall under the taxable category, so this is no different. If you plan to pay off a loan, let's say you get 10 grand and you say, I'm going to use all of this to pay off a loan. Well, you might do that and clear the loan, but in doing so, you're creating a £2,000 additional tax charge. So just watch out. You might want to keep a bit of money to one side to pay taxes. Speaking of paying taxes, if you say I'm going to pay off 10,000 of tax debts, or in fact any supplier debt, then that money has not been spent on furthering the business, and so there are no costs to offset against it. You might end up paying tax there. So if you're planning to use it to pay off loans, my suggestion to you, and it is a suggestion, is that you think about 8 grand instead of 10 grand and keep 2 grand aside in the savings account to consider your tax position. If you're one of our management accounts clients, then we'll be looking at your tax position monthly with you anyway, and we'll be happy to do that. If you're not, speak to us, and I'm sure that we could work out something where we can look at your interim profits and work out what your tax position will be. Right. Oh, don't be tax driven. Excuse me, just to go back briefly, I'm going to just say, don't be tax driven. Make commercially sound decisions to further the best interests of your company and yourself, really, and consider having awareness of the tax implications. This is our suggestion. Don't let the tax tail wag the dog. Okay. Finally and briefly, because I haven't got much to say on this, the government have reminded us that they will come down like a ton of bricks on anyone who abuses these grants or tries to claim them when they are not entitled to them. Precisely how and precisely what they want to see to prove that you are entitled has not been made clear for the job retention scheme, but I think it's pretty clear now for the self-employed scheme and also for the business loans that are connected to small business rate relief. Any questions about that, let us know and we'll help you stay the right side of the law. But I think so far they've been quite straightforward, in that there aren't lots of conditions, maybe ambiguous because they're lacking detail. I'm sure that the government won't penalise people for making the best decision with the information available to them, but they may try and claw back money that you were not entitled to. All right, that is everything that I wanted to go through with you today in half an hour. So thanks to everyone who's been asking questions as we go, but I think now is a chance for you to ask any further questions. So let's see what questions are coming in. And I'm going to have a quick look over the questions that have been asked. For self-employed sole traders who've been operating for the last couple of years and have made tax returns, what are HMRC classing as profit? Is this income they've been required to pay? So what I'm taking from this is that you're asking, is it your income before costs? Is it your income after costs? Or is it your taxable, or is it your income after you've taken money for yourself? It's the number that appears on your tax return on the self-assessment page of the calculations as total income. And this number is your income minus your business expense, but before you take any money for yourself. So they'll look at that for the last 3 years, divide it by 3, and then divide it by 4 to get a 3 months allowance, and then times it by 80%, and that should be what they're giving out to you. Thanks for your, Richie, thanks. Very interesting point on exiting maternity early to be placed on furlough. Yeah, I mean, just imagine if you did that and then we were allowed out in a month's time or even a few weeks' time. Although I don't hear many people saying that it's highly likely, you could end up causing yourself a lot of trouble. But at the same time, risk and reward. If you think this is going to go on for a long time, you may choose that that's an option you'd prefer. You continue to go on maternity as normal. So if you're on furlough at the moment and then you are due to go on maternity leave, you can be furloughed up until that point, and then you can go on maternity after that. Can you appoint a person to run the company in your absence? So presumably you're asking, can a company director appoint someone to run the company in their absence? Yes, they can. But if they are taking on the legal duties of a director, then they would become a director themselves. So they are not only being appointed to run the business, but also to take the legal responsibility for the business. Someone once said to me, they were a company lawyer actually, and they said, I don't know why anyone would ever sign up to being a director. The only reason I can see that someone would sign up to being a director is that they did not fully understand the duties of being a director and what can happen if it goes wrong. So sorry to scare all you company directors out there, but they were specifically talking about maybe being a director for a charity, or let's say if you were choosing to appoint your wife as a director, or husband, does your partner understand the implications of being a director? what responsibilities they have. Has that been made clear to them? So yes, appoint someone, but do make it abundantly clear to them what they're expected to do in your absence. If you're able to do that, then yes, I suppose you could then furlough yourself as a salaried director who's taking leave. Be careful not to just tell them what to do though, because surely that would be working, which you're not allowed to do on furlough. Next up, if I wish to delay the July tax payment, do I contact HMRC? Cheers, Diana, for answering this one. It's an automatic deferment. There's no need to contact them. They are just not expecting your money. However, what I would say to everyone is calculate your taxes early so you know how much you owe them. This doesn't stop you owing them money. It just changes when you need to pay it by. So work out how much you owe them. Otherwise, it's like taking out a loan agreement to not have to pay something until January 2021, like buy now, pay later, but not actually stopping to ask how much money you've borrowed. Can you imagine going into the shop and saying, yeah, I'd like buy now, pay later for this new machine? Oh, don't worry about telling me how much it costs. Just tell me in January when I have to repay it. That doesn't make sense. Work it out early and then work out how you're going to save the money for it. If I get a job, will this affect my grant? Yeah, if you're self-employed, you're entitled to that money, as long as your self-employment income has been the majority of your income. So that means 50% or more of your income in the previous years. My understanding is they're going to base that on the previous years, not on the current year. So I don't see anything that would stop you from getting a job now, so long as the money you earn from your job, well, just watch out. If the money from your job is going over 50%, then it might, of your self-employed earnings in the year, that could cause an issue, but I don't think so, because I think they're going to look backwards. You've put a name next to that one, so Diana, maybe we could have a little look into that afterwards and get back on that specific question. Oh no, someone can't hear me. Poor you, or lucky you. Lucky you's probably right, actually, isn't it? On having a job, let's talk about people on job retention scheme. If you put someone on furlough and they're receiving job retention scheme money from you, that does not stop them from having another job that they continue to work. So they could continue to work elsewhere, so long as your employment contract allows it. If your employment contract says you must not have another job, then they must not work during that period they're on furlough. Whereas if you allow them to work, then they may have another job. There are exceptions to what you are allowed to do. You're allowed to continue training and you're allowed to continue volunteering whilst on furlough, regardless of the content of your contract. So that's volunteering or training, volunteering for someone else, presumably not for your business, nor for any connected business, and training for your own self-interest. Apprentices. If you employ an apprentice and their wage is below, it is, if you employ an apprentice and paying them 80% reduces them below national minimum wage because you are paying them at the lower end of the allowable spectrum, you must increase the pay that you are paying your apprentice to that minimum. I believe it's £4.20, but please check it. Don't quote me on that. Oh no, it's, oh, happy new tax year, everybody. The national minimum wage has changed again, so I'm sure that the number I've just quoted is wrong. But if you're paying someone and because they are on furlough, they're receiving less than approximately £4.20 an hour, then you'd need to top up to the national minimum wage for apprentices, which is a new amount from April onwards. So look out for that. But I don't know too many people who are paying people at that level, but if you are, watch out. Or if you know someone who's being paid at that level, tell them that they must ensure they receive at least national minimum wage for an apprentice. Do we think there might be the possibility to pay the small business rate relief grant back in full and avoid the tax liability if we find at the end of this we didn't need it? That's an idea, isn't it? You could just pay it back. So you could receive 10 grand of income and then you could pay it back. I wouldn't do that. I don't think I would do that. I mean, maybe you're, the only reason I can see that you might do that is if you're concerned for the government running out of money and you might think they need this more than I do. Personally, I would prefer to find something very useful for your business or my business that would help me to grow my business in the future, and spend it on that. For example, maybe you'd like to employ us to do a set of forecasts, and we could charge you £10,000. If you really don't want the money, we can take it from you, and then you end up with no tax bill. Probably if you considered that, you're going to say no thanks, John. And don't worry guys, we don't charge £10,000 for forecasts. But how about marketing? That'd be a nice marketing budget for when we bounce back from this, surely. What about a bit of admin assistance in the office to get those jobs that you never get done? Well, what about 8 grand for your next holiday? All right, you've got to put 2 grand into a savings account to pay the tax. Personally, and this is just personally, I'd prefer all of those options over giving the money back to the government. Let's see what other questions there are. This is the final one, is get well soon, Boris. I'm not sure how to answer that. Not really a question, but thank you anyway. So I'll just pause a moment in case there are any more questions. Fire them through now, or forever hold your peace for 7 days. I'll come back next week with another update of what we found. If you find anything interesting in the meantime, please let us know. We'll continue to do these updates. I'm in discussions with a few other people to bring some thoughts from their perspective. So if you're interested, we can get an employment lawyer on, or we could speak to someone about about how we can avoid overspending or saving for the future, all sorts of things that we can discuss there if tax is starting to sound dull. So if you've got ideas of things that you would like to hear from us, please let us know. Thanks to Diana for answering the questions, and to Kate for keeping up with me on the slides, and for pushing the questions through when they came through. Thanks to you lot for watching as well. Really appreciate you coming in, and yeah, I hope it's been of use to you. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.